On August 2nd, 1990, I was in my Jeep, CJ7 that I really liked, and I was headed north, although technically it's west, on I-64, Virginia, from Virginia Beach to Williamsburg. Williamsburg is one of my favorite places. I was on my way to go to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. Not that it matters, but it was my first date with my now ex-wife. As I passed Newport News, there came on the radio an announcement that Iraq had invaded Kuwait. Now, there were two things that went through my mind at that point that I distinctly remember. I can still feel the wind. I had the hardtop off. And I can hear my own voice in my own head say these two things. One, I was probably the only person in our entire office that could find Kuwait on a map without cheating. And number two, wondered specifically what our response would be. And I knew even then that our response was going to have to be more than just sanctions in the United Nations. As it turns out, the ensuing weeks and months would change my life anyways, but that's a story for another day. Main thing I want to talk about is what happened during that conflict known as the First Gulf War, because we saw something then that hitherto we had never seen before. It's hard for me to explain this to younger folks, you folks born after, say, 93, 95, somewhere in there. You have never seen this like this. And maybe you saw the 2001, the 9/11 attacks and the wall-to-wall coverage, but all of that was born out of what happened in 1990. 10 years before that, a new cable news network had come into existence. It was called CNN, Cable News Network. And for those of us who were news wonks, CNN, along with its sister station, Headline News, were amazing. I mean, it was, in my view at the time, it was the only reason to have cable television. I know, MTV, blah, blah, blah. But CNN was, once upon a time, a fantastic thing. And when the war finally broke out, in the Gulf War I, it was CNN, a relatively newcomer. They were only 10, almost 11 years old at that time. They completely outstripped everything that the other three major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, were doing. They went wall to wall with coverage of the First Gulf War. It was, not to find a point on it, it was enthralling. It was on constantly. And it was this quasi-entertainment information approach to life, approach to the war, that caused so many of us to really, at that point, become CNN junkies. And I'm telling you, you don't understand it today, but those three guys right there on the video, Bernard Shaw, John Holloman, and Peter Arnett. Peter Arnett he was called at one point, I'm trying to remember the nickname they had for him. Was it Scud Dodger? Scud Man? Something like that. He was on the ground in Iraq, and he was constantly, or on the ground in Saudi Arabia, constantly dodging scuds and like that. Bernard Shaw became the closest thing this nation had ever seen since Walter Cronkite had stepped out. The trustworthy voice that we all listened to. And it was the first time I'd ever heard in my life these words said, quote, "Hey, you want to come over after work and watch the war?" Unquote. It was strange. It was enthralling. It was interesting. And of course, it made for conversation the likes of which had never, been capable of before. We had coverage in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, but it was always on the evening news, in the Vietnam era. And it was usually just a couple of minutes of body counts and, the enemy said this today and we said that today and blah, blah, blah. But now all of a sudden we had journalists who were embedded with our forces, who were reporting from the front lines. And granted, we had no way of knowing if it was accurate or not. In fact, the reporters would sometimes say, I don't have any idea where we are. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I'm saying. Look over there. See that? Isn't that cool? That's all. It became paradigm shifting. It really did in a lot of ways. All of a sudden, we were there. I mean, I know there used to be a show called You Are There. And this was it, man. We were there. And for myself, being involved as I was during the first Gulf War, it was an interesting way to keep up with what was going on and sort of kind of try to predict what we would be doing next. There's some things I still can't talk about and I wouldn't talk about. But the reality of it is you could watch the news and go, okay, well, tomorrow we'll be doing this. And if you were savvy and understood things, you could do that. It had been done before, like I said, in World War II, World Korea, Vietnam, but not like this, not live. It was a paradigm shift of paradigm shifts. I mean, it really was. It's still blown away. Hey, you want to come over after work and watch the war? I mean, it was strange. I don't know that I can even explain it to you. Jump ahead now to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This has been called, heard a pundit yesterday call this the First Tik Tok War. This is really the first major, there have been some minor skirmishes and stuff, I get it, but this has been the first major engagement of armed forces in the social media instant information period. Russia invades Ukraine and social media just freaking explodes. It blew up. I follow some Twitter accounts. I'm going to be honest here. I don't use TikTok. My wife does. I don't for a couple of reasons. One, because I've tried to watch it a few times and it just makes no sense to me. I mean, there's stuff on TikTok that everybody else finds riotously funny, and I don't get it. I'm sorry. It's not that I don't get that it's supposed to be funny because everybody's laughing at it, but I can't tell you why. Guess that makes me humor impaired. I don't know. I don't follow Reddit because Reddit is freaking. I'm an old man with bad eyes, and it's very hard to follow. I do follow Twitter. I have learned over the past 10, 12 years to sort Twitter in a way that I can follow it. So most of what I follow is on Twitter. The night of the invasion, I had to turn my phone off. It was just lighting up every 5 seconds, and it was crazy. And even today, 4, 5, 6 days later, I'm finding myself unfollowing accounts or at least turning off the alerts on those accounts because it's just overwhelming information. There's more information than I can process. It's like 1991 watching that whole thing again, but at the same time, there's so much here. Mike, the Milsurp writer, and I were talking about this on Friday or Saturday. I don't remember. And we were commiserating to some degree about it, but we were also impressed by it because there's so much information here that's hitherto never been available before. But there is a caveat. How much of this information is accurate? Now think about this for just a moment. It's turning out that some of these news stories, one of the great news stories of this whole story is this whole war, the Snake Island defenders. Russian warship, go fuck yourself. I mean, that's going to be T-shirt material. That's going to be flags, you name it. That's Twitter handles, the whole 9 yards. It's brilliant. I mean, it's right up there with McNally's nuts response to the Nazis at the Battle of the Bulge. American commander, surrender, you're surrounded. Nuts. We got you right where we want you. But it's turning out that may not be true. There are starting to be questions about whether or not all 13 of those defenders were in fact killed. The ghost of Kiev. Don't send me your emails about how I pronounce it, okay? I don't care. I'm American, speak English, it's anglicized, you don't like it, tough. The ghost of Kiev is turning out to be, hope it's true, but is it? Nobody can confirm it. Nobody can do anything. Yesterday, there was a story floating about the Russian, I keep calling so, the neo-Soviet chief of staff, the army being fired by Putin because he was mad about something. And of course, that leads to questions. Was he fired because he was opposing Putin's actions, or was he fired because they weren't going well enough? He wasn't doing a good enough job. And of course, the answer to that question is, we don't even know for sure that he was fired. Nobody's confirmed or denied it. Nobody has said anything. And my policy when it comes to government stuff is never believe anything until it's been officially denied. So there you go. Most of what we're seeing on TikTok, most of what we're seeing on social media in general is completely and utterly positive. It's all about how brave Ukrainians are standing up to tanks and making them stop. It's all about how Ukrainian folks are filming Russian stuff moving down the streets. And there's an interesting video, and I don't even have time to post them all to folks to show you everything, because there's so much out there that is just beyond the pale. I mean, you can't even keep up with it all. But there's stuff out there about, the Russian prisoners of war, the sunflower lady, which is turning out probably not to be true, although she clearly says it on the video. I mean, I think she does. I don't speak Ukrainian. How much of this overwhelmingly positive social media stuff from Ukraine is actually accurate? And so you can get lost in that. Well, if this is accurate, if this is meaningful, if this is in, but here's the real question. Does it matter if it's accurate or not? I know what you're saying. Stay with me. There are two factors involved here that I think need to be given deep consideration. Number one, and I am not a ground pounder. I'm not an infantryman. I'm not. My ground war experience is limited to Avalon Hill war games, squad leader, Third Reich, that kind of stuff. But this Soviet invasion, more and more, neo-Soviet invasion, more and more is being questioned by experts, again, quote unquote, who are intrigued by the idea that it is incredibly disorganized and not well executed at all. Now, there may be some logic to that, and I am chasing down some of those things. There may be some reasons for that, but the bottom line is the whole thing is just, it's turned into what was supposed to be, we're just going to roll into Kiev and the people are going to welcome us with open arms and denazify and everything like that, isn't turning out to be true. Did the Russians miscalculate? Were the Russians overestimated? Did they underestimate the Ukraine? What happened? Doesn't really matter at this point, because the Soviet invasion, the neo-Soviet invasion, is clearly not going according to the way that the Russians thought it was going to go. That said, it's still going. Now, there was a tendency during the Second World War to, Germans especially would do this, talk about strategic withdrawals as victories. Our glorious army fell back 20 miles, but is still holding off the Red Army kind of thing. The movie Jacob the Liar really does a great job with this. If you're paying attention and you're drawing lines on maps and stuff like that, you can see that the neo-Soviets are advancing, but it's not going swimmingly. I mean, they're not rolling in like on a blitzkrieg or something. They're facing resistance that they were not expecting, which brings me to the second item, which is that social media, as we've seen over and over again, social media is rallying the Ukes, the Ukrainians. It is rallying them to the cause. It is causing them to be pleased with their resistance. Why does that matter? Because the more positive stuff we're seeing from Ukraine about how we're fighting back against the neo-Soviets, how we're we're embarrassing the Russians, how we're humiliating them, even though we're probably losing overall, still making it cost them. At the same time all that's happening, we're learning that the neo-Soviets, the Russians, Putin, is shutting down social media inside Russia. And insofar as they're able, I guess they're allies. If the neo-Soviets are shutting it down, what does that tell us? Very positive Ukraine shut down Russia. So what doesn't Russia want getting out there? That's the real question. And of course, we know, at least in principle, some of that answer is they don't want the word for it, the protests. They don't want that stuff getting out there. They don't want the information about the ruble falling. They don't want all that stuff out there. Again, it brings back the question, does accuracy really matter in all this? Is that really a video of an Aleutian getting shot down? Or is it just something else? Is this picture of Zelensky wearing body armor from 2001 or something, from 2021, or is it from now? Does it really matter? In the pantheon of war, in all of these things, there's a great study out there. Rand Corporation did it, called The Will. I forget what the title is, but it's about why nations fight. The Millsop writer has a lot of commentary on this. One of the soft factors involved is morale. One of the soft factors involved is a nation's will in the face of overwhelming odds to keep going. And things like Russian warship, go fuck yourself. Things like, well, at least put these seeds in your pockets so that when you die, sunflowers will grow, is stuff that feels organic. It doesn't feel like propaganda. Propaganda is pretty obvious. This doesn't feel like it's manufactured propaganda. It feels like the kind of thing that real Ukrainians would say and do. And so it's inspiring. Whether it's true or not becomes questionable, because it's improving the morale of the Ukrainians, and it is reinforcing their will to fight, their will to stand up. You see things like Miss Ukraine, the gal that won the Miss Ukraine contest, I guess, to compete in the Miss World contest or something. Wouldn't be Miss USA, but she's donning her body armor and carrying her gun and getting out there. This is the kind of thing that it encourages people. It makes people stand up and go, yeah, I want to fight for the same cause. That will to fight, that will to stand up becomes reinforced by people like this. Is it true? Is it accurate? I don't know. But at this point, does it matter? If the morale, if the will to fight, if we have discovered in TikTok and social media a new means of reinforcing a nation's will to fight, at the end of the day, does it really matter if this whole thing is fake or not? Sure it does. I do know this. Russia shutting off their social media tells me a lot about their will to fight, and they're very concerned about it. If this report, Why Nations Fight, is correct, it may have been wrong last week. Militarily, Ukraine might win this. But that's a problem too, because then Putin becomes desperate, and desperation generates irrationality, and irrationality, well, irrationality leads to really bad things.